I vividly remember standing in Wegmans. It was about 5 a.m, and I had been at the hospital all night with Jim, my stepdad. He had congestive heart failure, and we were on this roller coaster of hospital admissions and getting back home and him wanting to live. And I had been at the hospital with him all night, and I was standing there at Wegmans. I was actually buying lunch stuff, probably for your lunch, to be honest. And I was going to get that stuff, and I was going to take it home and get you up and get you on the bus and honestly go back to work. And I was standing there, and I honestly, I don't know what the cashier thought of me. Like, I don't know if she thought I'd been out all night or had, some sort of like something in my body, but I couldn't even make change. Like, I couldn't even pay her. And she said to me, "Are you okay?" And I looked at her and I just said, "No, I'm not okay." But I got all my groceries, and I got home, and I got you up and got you on the bus, and I went to work. And we went through that for years of Jim, my stepdad, battling congestive heart failure, and me trying to be the support for my mom, who was her caregiver. And this podcast is dedicated to my mom, Carol Armstrong. We call this podcast Hey Woman, because we used to say, "Hey woman, how are you?" And it's about life and legacy and love and just an open and honest conversation about just how hard this all is. I'm Julie Steinbacher, and I'm an elder law attorney who has helped many families navigate this really tough journey, but also have had to navigate it myself with my stepdad, my father-in-law, and most recently my mom. And I'm thrilled to be joined here today with my daughter, Cortney, who's a CPA, who's also walked this journey with me as a little kid and later as a grown adult. And what we wanted to do today is to talk about the reality of just how hard caregiving can be.
And really, like, how it looks different at the different phases. So when I think about Pap and the congestive heart failure, he passed away the summer between 8th and 9th grade for me. Those are really formative years, and it changed a lot of the decisions I made, I think without me really even recognizing it or being able to accept that that's why I was making those. But I remember getting to junior year of high school, and the biggest decision you make then is where to apply to college.
Yeah.
And I knew that I had to stay on the East Coast. So I grew up in Pennsylvania. I live in Boston now. I ended up in a school at Northeastern. And for some reason, I just knew I wanted to be able to get home. So at the time, Nan, she had...
You wanted to be able to get home in a day, for sure.
If I had to.
Yeah.
And, there was nothing really that had happened in my life at that point where, that had needed to be true, where I needed to get home in a day until I was at Ernst & Young. I was in my first internship. It was the middle of busy season, so if you're an accountant and you're listening, what I did next is kind of, not really accepted, but I went to my boss and I said, "My mom is having her appendix out. I need to go home." And, it was just an intern, so please know the audit was not hinging on my shoulders in any stretch of the word. But it was a Friday, and I was going to miss a Saturday. And I said, I have to go home. And I knew I had options. So I didn't have a car at the time, but I could have rented a car. I was a little young to be doing that, but it could have been done. And I remember calling Uncle Buddy. I remember calling your brother, and he came and got me off the train here in Newark. So I jumped on a train that night after work, and Uncle Buddy came and got me and drove me home. And it was not the first time. It was the first time I came home, but it wasn't the last.
Yes.
And I knew then that I had made the right decision, even if I hadn't recognized what it was. And I think that's what we're here to talk about today, is that first you have to recognize that that's the journey that you're on, that, there is a diagnosis, that you are caregiving, that your life is different.
And that you're not okay.
Right.
Because, and I think that's an important, a time to pause, that everybody that's listening, because I was raised on a farm. I was raised by a woman who said to me, "You're going to be okay. You can do this. Just work harder, do more." And so I wasn't really trained to say, this isn't okay. Like, that's why that's so important, because it was like, a stranger's looking at me and saying, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, no, and so I think that is like so important for people to be able to hear that this is really hard. And the first step is just acknowledging that that's where you're at.
When it's funny, because the same woman that raised you to tell you that it's not okay is the same woman who raised me and told me that it's okay to skip a day of school and to sit on her couch and to let her cook me lunch, and that it really is okay to spend your day in your pajamas at Nan's. And so, it's funny what probably, 25, 30 years does to her advice. But
I can pounce on that and remember when, I was raised not eating sugar-coated cereals. I mean, you ate like puffed rice without sugar in it. Like, there was none. And I can remember, like, it was okay for you to have like Oreo cookies and coffee for breakfast.
Well, that's what you had at Nan's, So the difference between a mom and a grandmother, I think, really probably comes through here. But I do think, even though she taught me that it was okay to take a day, she still was that same woman that, like, you have to push through. And I think we both got that from her, which is a blessing and a curse. And I think, a lot of people today do just push through. And you're in it so much that it's hard to even stop without the cashier at Wegmans asking you if you're okay.
The perfect stranger, it makes me acknowledge where I'm at in my life, and like that, that caregiving chapter of my life that I'm in, and like, no, I'm not okay, but that's just the first step.
It really is, because next is actually arguably harder, which is accepting it.
Yeah, that it is harder.
And I think that comes with so many different things, because what you're accepting not only is that caregiving is the chapter in your life, but you're accepting that there's a diagnosis.
Yeah, and you're accepting that it could be a diagnosis that's not curable. It could be a diagnosis that is going to be really hard. So I remember when my father-in-law got dementia, and for a long time, my mother-in-law would just say, "Oh, he's hard of hearing." And, sometimes that was frustrating for other members of the family. But, like, I knew that it just came from a place. Like, it wasn't that she wasn't hearing. It wasn't that she didn't know. She couldn't accept that this wonderful, strong, vibrant, man wasn't going to be that way. It was easier, So accepting whatever that diagnosis is really hard. But you can't take steps in your life to change it until you do accept. Because I think otherwise what happens is we keep our lives the way they are, and they're packed, and, the story about Wegmans was really my first, as a mom with kids and a job, my first time of like caregiving. And I didn't accept that this was happening to my stepdad. And sometimes it's hard because he had congestive heart failure. And, you could get mixed signals from the medical community. And it was a roller coaster. So he was in ICU that night, but he could come home and be better or okay. Maybe in my mind it was better, but so you don't always have a lot of information that would support you saying, hey, this is what's going to happen. And I think for me, you don't have to accept that somebody's going to pass away. You don't have to accept that everything's going to end. I think what you're really just trying to accept is that you're in a new chapter of your life, and that this is going to be a long journey, and not everything fits in, so it doesn't matter if we're talking about business or our lives. There's only so much time in a day. And, at the time I owned my own practice, I still do. I have my own law practice. And I just had to accept that sometimes my schedule was going to get sideways. And that was going to happen literally for a couple of years. And I could decide not to change things that would allow time to to take on all those changes. And then my life is just disrupted constantly. Or I could say, this is going to keep happening. And so what do I need to do and change? And I think for me, it's accepting that I wanted to support my mom. Like, I wanted to be there for her. And every time I think about caregiving, I and your dad, my husband, made very intentional choices that we wanted to be there. And so, and I think, your story about me getting my appendix out was kind of that thing where you said, I want to be able to get home in a day because I want to be able to be there. And please know there could be people who are listening that doesn't matter as much to. And I also don't want to say in any way, if you're listening and you can't get home in a day, that you can't be really, really supportive.
Right. It's just much more intentional. So physical presence is really only one way to show up as a caregiver. And I think what we're both talking about is a mix of what's really interesting. When we started this podcast, we're talking about caregiving for the person who has the diagnosis, but you're also caregiving for the caregiver, which I think is a really interesting part of this journey. And so for me, I knew that getting home in a day was really important, because if I think about showing up for you, that was one of the reasons. But the other reason that I knew that I needed to get home was to help my dad. And dad is not a phone person.
No.
You can actually, I remember being in college and you could hear him set the phone down on his workbench and walk away. And I was like, no, we're still talking. I think we recently broke a record and he had to get off the phone because he saw how much time had lapsed. I was like, Dad, I'm mid-sentence. And he's like, no. He's like, I have to go, do something. So I knew that phone support wasn't the answer for him. My physical presence to be there for him was what was really important. But I think, that goes back to one, accepting the diagnosis of the person, but also really maybe the third step is understanding how to care for caregivers or how people want to receive support. I did make a decision to go to Boston. So, I was 6.5, 7 hours away. And, but I made decisions throughout, kind of the end of Nan's journey that I was coming home once a month. And so, that was a time, but I also called her all the time. And she was a person that liked to sit on the phone.
Oh, yes.
Especially if I was driving somewhere late or something like that, she stayed up. So she was very much apt to watch the 10 o'clock news and then call and tell me all about it. And it's well, woman, I have to work tomorrow. Yeah. So, it's 10:45, I'm ready to go to bed. But I think, that doesn't work for everybody. And so that's why caregiving, I think, is so hard sometimes, is because it's not a one size fits all. You really have to dig into the person and decide that whatever decisions you've made that's gotten you to this point in your life, you can't change those. And so how do you move forward in the best way possible with the circumstances that you have?
When you also can't be in a situation where you say, I can't do that, I can't change. Because the reality is you will change. Right. Quite honestly, the statistics are glaring about the amount of people. So 57% of people, these are from the Alzheimer's Association, these statistics from 2025, but 57% of people are going to, for the first time, show up late to work, leave early, take a promotion. Their job is going to be affected by it. And, as an employer, I see that because when you're caring for a kid and you have to take off because you have to take them to the doctor because they're sick, that's a temporary thing, and they're going to get better, most of the time. But when you take off to take your mom or your dad or somebody to the doctor, often it just is a bigger problem, And so I want people to know, this is affecting you. So if you're sitting there saying, well, I can't do anything about it, you have to, because otherwise something's going to be done about it. You're going to get burnt out. You're going to ruin relationships in your life. Work is a relationship too. 16% of people will end up taking a leave of absence from their job if they're caregiving. And these statistics in my mind are just going to get more stark. And the reason is because we don't have enough caregivers for the care needs. We don't have enough now. And for a variety of reasons, more demand, less available workers, that's just going to get more difficult. And so it's going to be on family members to do more of this. And please know, family members already do most of it. If somebody has dementia, Alzheimer's, which is just a form of dementia, 70% of that care right now is being done by family members, unpaid family members. Sometimes it upsets me when people say, oh, in the U.S. they don't care for their loved ones. That's not true. That's not true. But what we need to understand is that you do have the power, but in order, like we said, you have to first admit you're not okay. And accept that this is happening. And then for me, it is always helpful for me, and this is a Brene Brown thing, but it is always helpful for me to then name it. And that's why for a lot of times I call it a caregiving chapter in my life. And for me, that's helpful because it means that it's temporary. If we think about our life as a book, this is just the chapter I'm in right now. This is what I have to do, but it's not always going to be like that. And there's going to be some good and bad about whatever transition that is, So it's not like I want that chapter to be over, but it does make me know that if I was putting something off, I don't always have to put that off. I'm just delaying that project or postponing that trip or whatever. Doesn't mean I won't ever get to do that. It just means that that's not what I'm doing right now. Now some of the decisions you talked about are more permanent decisions that you made to choose where you live, but you also, I think, did it quite well in not shutting off everything.
Yeah, so I talk about going to college at Northeastern. I still spent my first semester of college in Australia. Right. So you're not getting home from Australia in a day, one, because you lose a day flying out of LAX, right? So, you cross the international date line, you're losing a day no matter what, right? So, but I knew that was the opportunity of a lifetime to go to Australia, spend my first semester of college there. And it is a long trip. And so it was something that was nice to just do it once and stay for 4 months. But I knew that was a temporary thing, and that if I thought about college as a decision and what I wanted to do, the majority of my decision was made based on being able to get home. And I do think, it changed the way I thought about things. I was more intentional about paying attention to the time difference and different things like that, and calling Nan. And she actually learned to email during that time. So she was working at your office. And this was before she was really sick. So, she had fallen and had a drop foot, but she was really okay. She was driving, she was going to work. And so, when I made the decision to leave, it wasn't it was, oh my gosh, she just got this diagnosis. She's, we're upending our own life. She really was okay. But I knew that, things could happen. And I had seen that with, my grandfather passing away, and then my other grandfather having dementia. He really had it for 15 years. And so if you think about, that journey of, my grandfather having dementia for 15 years, you can't just not make any decisions.
Right.
You can't not go on vacation for 15 years.
Yeah, that's a long chapter.
It really was. But it was, what I think was interesting about that too, and what you did with Nan, is that if we were going to go on a trip, one, is it a shorter trip? Do you go somewhere more local? Do you take them with you? Or do you really need a vacation where, and not in a mean way, but, you need to mentally reset from caregiving, if you have siblings or if you have friends or different things like that, getting somebody who's on call and available, and that if something were to arise, they can take the person to the hospital, or they can kind of jump in or stop and help out, So, there were years in there where you and Uncle Buddy just didn't go on vacation at the same time.
No, we didn't. And even if we talk about work trips, I wouldn't have usually called my brother and said, hey, I'm flying to such and such to work. But, I started calling him and saying, hey, I just want to let you know I'm going to be out of town. are you going to be in town in case something happens with mom? And so that was, kind of where I was at. And if he couldn't, then I would go down to like a grandchild and say, hey, if something happens, are you able to go to the hospital if Nan falls or, something happens in that situation? So yeah, you do. And I think part of that is what's hard about that for so many people, even myself, is even once we understand we're there, we need this, we have to ask for help. And that's really hard. We have to, I know many times I feel this way too. So just as a disclaimer, even though I'm, saying you shouldn't feel like this, I'll say I do too. Like, why don't they know? Like, why don't they know that I need help? Why don't they know that their mom needs help? So when we think about other people who maybe aren't caregiving as much, it's pretty easy to get into this whole idea of why don't they do more? And I would encourage everybody to just to, like, as soon as you feel that way, stop. Because it's not constructive and it's not going to change anything. It's not going to, if they don't know, they don't know.
Right. They're not just going to like magically understand one day that like what they're doing is a little, off.
Right. And so, and they might be in their own journey of accepting it or understanding it. And they may not just have seen enough of it, So I think that you have to ask them. You have to say, I need you to do this. And that's hard.
Well, I think this is a great place to talk about, sometimes we joke about the out-of-town kid, right? And like I was the out-of-town kid. But I think, what made that so successful is, when I came home, I did still stay with you, right? I still came into my childhood bedroom. And
which you still have.
Well, I had to work really hard to keep, right? So like I do have my own place in Boston, but it's important to me that I always have a place to come home to.
I want all the listeners to know you own your own place in Boston, yet I have to keep your childhood bedroom intact
because you disassembled it my freshman year of college for my sister to move in. It was packed up and in the attic before my flight landed. My first flight into LAX.
I did paint her room and then unpack it. It is still there.
She never fully evacuated.
Well, that's a sister thing. That's not me. Yeah. Yes. So I just think it's important that, people know.
That they understand where we're coming from and that my room is important to me. But I think, I had a place to go. But I think sometimes, maybe that's not helpful, right? Mm-hmm. So like, I come home and I have all these thoughts of like these foods that like I want to eat and like want dad to cook me dinner because I've been living on dining hall food. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it's just like, oh my gosh, that's one more thing. But it's important that like I'm not there like day in and day out. And so some of my visiting with Nan, you just sat me down and was like, this is what you're going to do. Like she needs a shower.
Yep. I'm tagging you in.
Yeah. And I think, it didn't come across as like mean. It wasn't, but you had done it every Saturday for the last, couple of months. If I was going over there anyway, I might as well just give her a shower, right? Because that's what she needed. And that was helpful to you. And I think what's really important here is you didn't go with me. Like,
no, I didn't.
You explained to me how to do it, what to look out for. And you explained to me, what she was going to try to tell me to do that maybe was not the safest things for her to be doing or the different ways that she tried to like extend things. But for her, it was nice because that was the only thing I had to do that day. So right. I came home with that purpose. And so the fact that she wanted to spend 45 minutes putting on her makeup when like she really didn't usually have that luxury was really fine. And so it was a nicer experience for her, probably not nicer for you the next time you did it, because then she would tell you how I did it better.
Yeah. I did have to hear that. Yeah. But I was appreciative for kind of the day off,
right.
Because I had other things. And please know, it's not that I didn't want to do it for her. But again, when we think about this journey and this chapter, you have to take the breaks that you're given because, when kids were home from college, like I tapped them in. I just let them know, hey, you can take Nan here, you can do this, because she couldn't drive. Because when they weren't there, it was Buddy and I. Well, I should not say that. Your dad, my husband, Donald, her son-in-law, like definitely. And there were some more local kids, but they had at times were in and out of college and, could be helpful. So I do think, and I think this is really important for people to hear. Like, I remember a coaching call I did. So I'm also a business coach. I help people get the lives and practices that they desire, particularly in the long-term care and elder law space. And I remember coaching somebody, and they were talking about, in their own situation, they had a parent who had a diagnosis, and they were describing to me like going home, and they really thought that their appearance was just making the world better, and they talked about how difficult it was, and please know, I get it was difficult. This person also owned their own business, and to have to get up, like you said, once a month and decide that you're leaving your place, and you're gonna make this journey. I don't want to belittle that at all, but I think in that situation, she was kind of showing up thinking that everybody should be glad that she was there. And I think the difference is when you showed up, you again were there to do what you could. And some of that was just giving me a break. Some of that was just taking on some of what I was doing or Uncle Buddy was doing. And please know, we want to mix that with, of course, you're home. So, of course your dad should make you the favorite meal or do those types of things. But, I think too many times there's a communication problem where the kids who are closer, the family that's closer, that's caregiving, isn't good at asking for what they need, just defining like, this is what I need. And maybe has some guilt even saying that they need that, And then the people who are coming home, there's a communication problem there and really an understanding of, what can I do to be supportive? And I would say to you, if you're an out-of-town person, your mere presence is helpful because the person that you're caring for, that you love so much, is really excited that you're there. But be very conscious of your footprint. Don't make more work for the other people who are holding down the fort the whole time, and I think that's important, I see other situations of this in my professional life where, and even in extended family, where maybe somebody is coming home and the one person that's there the whole time, all of a sudden now they're hosting them at their house, they're feeding them, but really it should be, hey, I'm coming home, let me clean your house for you,
Right.
Or let me go over and clean my mom's house or do things like what would be helpful. So I'd encourage people, if you're having these issues, it can transform how difficult this chapter is by having that open communication about, here's what I need, here's what you can do to support me. And this is, we're talking about out-of-town kids. This includes spouses. This includes like kind of anybody, because otherwise you can get into the situation where you think you don't have any choices, you think it can't get any better, and at the worst, that you're alone. And we hope, if nothing else, this podcast lets you know you're not alone.
When I think too, I just want to reiterate, I didn't do it perfectly, right? So I talk about like, oh, I did a good job. Like I gave her a shower and, we kind of joke about that. Like Nan would then say that like, I did it better. Well, if you're the caregiver who's doing it week after week and I come home once and do it once in a quarter, once a month, and then it's as that caregiver that's there, not to get resentful. Because it was just different. It's not that I did it any better than you. Mm-hmm. Of course I had more time. That was the whole purpose of my trip. But I think what you and I did well was that we were not afraid to have conflict with each other.
Right.
And I think that's actually what's important. Because sure, like there were times that I came home and I was like, well, why isn't this happening? Why haven't we gotten into this doctor? And you were very quick to sit me down and explain to me why those thoughts and feelings were not helpful. And so I just kept those in. Right? But I think, caregiving is part of, caring for the caregiver. Part of that is being okay with conflict and letting things go and just knowing that however that person perceives things, of course, and you see it time and time again, of course, the person that's there every day in and day out, that's raising kids, that's working. I was on like a little mini getaway, right? Where my only responsibility was to do what Nan needed me to do. Of course, I was her favorite. I was the one that didn't tell her no.
Right.
And I think that that's such a huge part. Like, sure, woman, you want to do your makeup for 45 minutes? I'll sit here.
Yes.
You want to watch a movie? You want to go get ice cream? But that was my job, was to say yes, to inject the fun. And so, of course, I was her favorite.
Right.
I mean, for probably other reasons, that we don't have to get into. I was probably her favorite.
I don't know. You are not the only grandson. So I do have to say you probably have to, as much as being the person that heard it on the other end. But I think for everybody to know too, not every relationship is going to be like that.
Right.
And you have to pick where you can. So we were able to hear it from each other. I may not have been able to hear the same thing you said to me from other people. And that's hard. And so we have to really I would encourage people to kind of think about the relationship, think about the conversation before we're asking for help or figuring out how we can be helpful. Because it could be that you're the out-of-town person and you want to be helpful, and all of a sudden, if I'm in town and you just come and do it better, that all I feel is that you're trying to show me what a bad job I'm doing. So I think that communication, and I think I could hear it from you more than maybe I could have heard it from a niece or, at times my brother. And so but I think there again, in our relationship, I always kind of joke that, and Nan would be so upset if I tell this on this podcast, but I'm gonna. But when my brother and I grew up, it wasn't perfect.
Right.
In fact, it was quite hard at times. But the one thing we learned growing up was how to have conflict. So how to have opposing opinions, talk about that honestly, and then make a decision and move on. And so we're actually able to do that quite well. And not every family is, because sometimes this is the first time that they haven't agreed with each other or they've had conflict. And add on there the fact that sometimes we're switching roles. It took me a while to be able to switch roles with my mom, because there's some baggage there. That was probably the relationship that was harder for me, because there was some baggage, and sometimes I did not want to hear it from her. Until again, kind of going back to I'm not okay. I have to accept where she's at and then lean into that. And that actually for me was really freeing, because then I could lean in a way that I hadn't leaned in before, to really kind of doing what she needed and wanted. And that for me took off some of the burden of caregiving, because I was able just to hear what she had to say. So, all of this is so complicated, but you can make it better. Simple things can move you forward.
And I think, just to give a couple examples of some simple things, whether you're caring for a caregiver, the caregiver that's caring for somebody with a diagnosis, some things just like using meal delivery services for something new and exciting to eat, or if you're caring for a caregiver, sending them food or going to get their groceries so that they don't have to think about it. Also, I think, knowing what the person, so Nan always really liked chocolate bars or different things like that. So taking things to make the visit better. And if you're coming in from out of town, don't be the person that brings all of the joy. So
Right.
sometimes leaving something that the person that's there can then go have a nice visit afterwards. And so it's not this seemingly false fun caregiver versus not, right? But
or bringing something for me, the caregiver. Thank you.
That's true. I do believe I sent some things.
Yeah, no, just joking.
But for your birthday some years, maybe it would have been nice if we had just hired a house cleaner to come clean your house or pick up the dry cleaning. Or a bigger thing is maybe as the out-of-town kid, you don't visit when the person is there, maybe you let the everyday caregiver go on vacation and that's when you visit. And so that gets hard because, maybe you live further away and you want to see your sibling plus your parents and you want to do it all at one time. But maybe that's actually more complicated. Or staying in a hotel if you know that your sibling is a person that cares about the way that their house looks and is going to be, washing the sheets and doing all the towels and like making sure that everything is scrubbed and clean, and it's like, oh my gosh, you just added all of this work onto what this person is already doing. And so maybe you stay at a hotel. But I think, even like when you think about, it's funny when you talked about Uncle Buddy and you talked about like your work trips and vacations, just a shared Google Calendar could really save some issues. You know what I mean? Like with like making sure all the doctor's appointments and like adding like the family members, and people can just like sign up and like, this is your, nobody can go to more doctor's appointments than Nan can. Like, I swear to God, that woman had a doctor for everything.
She did.
And they seem to like, I feel like all the appointments like clustered together. And so, there were 5 of us grandkids. If we all took one, it wasn't as big of a deal. So you're really spreading it out. And I think that's important when we talk about the caregiving chapter. One, it can be a long chapter, and I think that's sometimes what people aren't prepared for. And so, I talked about my grandfather had dementia for 15 years. That chapter was 15 years.
Yeah, it was.
And so this isn't something that you're just getting through. And I think, just to get a little bit serious here, at the end, after Nan passed, I was able to sit down and say, whatever decisions I made the right ones, and I didn't have any regrets. And so I think that's important, whether you're ready to accept that this is the end or not, knowing that whatever decisions you made the best decisions you could at the time so that you don't have regrets is the best gift you can give yourself.
100%. And I just want, everybody to know, like, you will still have regrets, because that's a natural part of grief, is kind of going through the process and what more I should do. But there are regrets you can kind of talk through and get to, I did do the best that I could do, because, that wasn't the only thing that needed me during that chapter. I also think that in this, professionally, I see way too much where families aren't able to come back together. And it's because of like this lack of communication. It was one-sided. A person passes away, everybody flies home, for the money, and I see that. I see it in my career. I work it every day. But what I would say is, if you take the advice on here and you do name it and accept it, and you ask for help, and whoever you ask can't give you that help, don't stay in being upset with them, because it's probably less about you and more about the fact that they can't accept the diagnosis and where they're at. And it is harder for somebody who's not in it every day to make that acceptance. And so it doesn't serve anybody for you just to be angry and upset about that, because that person just couldn't get there. Honestly, if you ask and it doesn't work out, we talked a lot in here about grandkids and siblings, and maybe you don't have family like that, but everybody does have somebody they can ask. There are church groups out there that would be helpful. There's friends. I think, one of the things that, Nan's funeral, she passed away December 19th. And we stupidly made the decision to have her funeral between Christmas and New Year's. Now, we thought it was a good decision because everybody was home. People wouldn't have to stay home longer. It was a bad decision because, no place was open. You can't get a venue, or a caterer. But in that circumstance, all the people who said, hey, let me know if I can do something to help you, I called them and texted them and said, hey, you can do something to help me.
Remember when you offered? I'm taking you up on that.
And so, that you will have people, coworkers, you will have people that you interact that make offers to you, and they're making offers in ways that are not specific. Just let me know if I can do anything. I'd encourage you to take them up on it. And I think many, many people, now, please know I'm a very optimistic person who believes in human nature, but I think my experience is that many of those people really meant it. They just didn't specifically know what to do to help you. So if you ask, they will do it. And that can make your caregiver chapter a little easier.
Yeah, it's almost like they're just like waiting for permission.
Yes.
To help, because they don't, I think people are good natured and they don't want to make it more difficult by giving help in a way that's not helpful. And so that can be a paralyzing thing. And so I do just want to say we did give the luncheon. Uncle Buddy was of the opinion after the third venue told us that we could just go without a luncheon. That would not have been an okay option in honoring what Nan would have wanted. But it ended up being a really nice day. And it was neat when you walked into we ended up having it at the Village, which is where she spent the last, 8 years.
8 years, yeah.
Of her life. And what you saw there was the people that she had touched, but also the people that were really there for us and all of our friends. And I think that was a really neat part of this to kind of like wrap up that caregiving chapter. But I want to thank people for listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
To this episode. I know we went through like a whole bunch of different things, but I hope you got some good ideas on, just sometimes saying that you're not okay is, the biggest part of this, but that caregiving is hard and we don't always know where that chapter is going to go. If you're listening, please comment, follow us along. We are now on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and all of the fun things. And we hope that we are able to let you know that if your support network isn't as vast or as deep, or if you're not really sure where to go, that this podcast holds a community for you to let you know that whatever you're feeling is really okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I just echo that. Thanks for being here. We are doing this as a salute to my mom, and even sitting here doing it makes me feel closer to people that are out there that are going through this chapter.